Mr Finn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. I rise to speak on the motion moved so eloquently by Mr Quilty earlier today, and I can't help but be struck constantly by the public perception of those of us in public office in this country. And I think it's probably not just an Australian thing. I think it's probably around the world where good folk, good hard-working taxpayers are out there with the view that we're all thieves and crooks. And that is a very, very sad state of affairs. But that is their view, and they can't be dissuaded from that. They think that we're all on the take. They think we're all shaking somebody down, or they think we're shaking everyone down, in fact. I have to say that a quick look at my bank account would reassure them that I'm not doing that very quickly. But unfortunately, it has to be said that the record of this government over its time over the last 5 and a bit years backs that up. It just feeds that perception because the Andrews government is a corrupt government. There is no other way of putting it. The Andrews government is a corrupt government, and that is simply stating a fact. And we don't have to go very far to establish why it is a corrupt government. We don't have to establish too much at all to prove that this government has done things which are shady, to say the very least. And that's understating things enormously. And we remember, of course, the red shirts rorts scandal of 2014, even before it was elected. Even before it was elected, this government was up to dirty tricks. This government was ripping off the Victorian taxpayer to get itself elected. And we remember that, and we know that was set up by the Labor Party in opposition, a deliberate ploy to take money out of the pockets of Victorians and to fund their campaign. It was, I have to say, breathtaking in its audacity, and it was only a matter of time before they were found out. And of course they were found out by the Ombudsman. They weren't happy. They weren't happy that they were found out by the Ombudsman, so they took it to the High Court. First they took it to the Supreme Court here in Victoria, then they took it to the High Court. Now, taking things to the Supreme Court and then to the High Court, that's not a cheap exercise. That would have cost the Victorian taxpayer millions and millions of dollars, because even if they'd got a cheap deal from some of their Labor lawyer mates, and we'll discuss that perhaps tomorrow, even if they'd got a cheap deal from Slater and Gordon or Maurice Blackburn's, even then they would be putting up a fair whack of Victorians' money to take this matter to court, so they would not have to be exposed as the crooks that they are. And that is the bottom line. That is the bottom line, and that is a simple fact of the matter. I mean, that is a matter of public record. This government went to the highest court in this land as a part of the cover-up to stop the people of Victoria finding out what it had done prior to the 2014 election. And that is simple as that. Simple as that. There is nobody that can dispute that. That is simply a fact. That is simply a fact. So, and that's what they did. That's what they did. And they fought it every inch of the way. They fought it every inch of the way. And even when the police got involved, when Victoria Police got involved, they refused. They refused to cooperate with Victoria Police. They refused to cooperate with the investigators who had been given the responsibility of uncovering this shysterism by the Victorian Labor Party. They refused. They refused to have anything to do with the police. They refused to speak to the police. They refused to involve themselves in providing justice in this particular instance. So if you're not prepared to speak to the police, I'd suggest to you very strongly you've probably got something to hide. You've probably got something to hide. And the Labor Party in this state has got plenty to hide. It's got plenty to hide. It ripped off the taxpayers to get elected. It then spent millions and millions and millions of dollars going to the Supreme Court and then to the High Court in Canberra to cover that up and to protect itself from the glare of public gaze. And that is an indisputable fact. Is it any wonder? Is it any wonder that people think we're all crooks? Is it any wonder when they see the government of Victoria, the Labor government of Victoria, involved in this sort of shysterism? Is it any wonder that people's perception? Is it any wonder that people's perception is built to the extent that it has been? And it gives me absolutely no joy, I have to say, to hear people speak of the Premier in the way they do. Because there's been a fair bit of water go under the bridge since November 2018, and the perception of the Premier by the great majority of people, I have to say, has changed significantly. Since November 2018, and what they're calling him now, well, I certainly couldn't say it in this House, and I have no intention of doing so, Madam Deputy President. I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear, and even with Mr Ondarchi offering his fulsome support, I still won't do that. But the fact of the matter is that this government is regarded by the great majority of Victorians as crooked, as corrupt. Dodgy is very mild compared to what people are calling the Andrews government as we speak, and that's if Mick Gatto or if Tony Mockbell. I won't say Gatto. I'll say Tony Mockbell. If Tony Mockbell had treated the police with the contempt the Victorian government treated the Victoria Police, that would be fully and totally expected. But we are talking about the Premier and the government of Victoria, and that is disgraceful. That is disgraceful, and that is a permanent stain, on the Andrews government, and a permanent stain on the Australian Labor Party. Something that Victorians have looked at, have watched from afar, and have been absolutely stunned by. I have to say, and not at all surprised that they have been. It's a pretty crook, literally a pretty crook setup when we have that sort of thing going on. We then move to a couple of blokes who were charged with the responsibility of.
Minister Symes, on a point of order.
I'm trying to block out Mr Finn's words. He's not remotely referring to the motion that Mr Quilty has put before the House. It's actually disrespectful to Mr Quilty, and frankly, can he please be brought back to the motion?
Madam Deputy President.
Further on the point of order, Mr Finn?
The fact of the matter is that the motion clearly refers to perceptions of corruption. The Corruption Perceptions Index talks about a score of 85 in 2012 to 77 in 2019. So that is exactly what I'm talking about. And if anybody had been listening to my contribution to this point, they would be well aware. That is exactly what I've used those words. Corruption perception. That is exactly what I've spoken about, Madam Deputy President.
Thank you. Whilst we are enjoying a broad-ranging debate on this particular motion, I would draw Mr Finn back to the actual substance of the motion. So, Mr Finn, to continue. Thank you.
Fully understand why Ms Symes is very, very tetchy about the facts being raised in this House. I can fully understand that. I would be too. If I was a member of a corrupt government, I would be tetchy too. I wouldn't want these sorts of things raised in the Parliament. I wouldn't want them raised. I mean, I'm not the Ombudsman. I'm not the Ombudsman. She doesn't have to take me to the High Court. She doesn't have to take me to the
Mr Finn, I just ask you to not be deliberately provocative, please.
Madam Deputy President, I am wounded. I am offended. I am offended that you would think that I would be deliberately provocative in any way. It's a simple. You know, I've just been stating the facts with regard to this motion. And the Corruption Perceptions Index is a reflection of what people think of us. Those who hold public office, and I'm just pointing out why people think the way they do. And you know, we had another couple of blokes who were charged with the responsibility of leading one house of this parliament. A bloke called Telmo Langwheeler, who was the speaker of the other place, and another chap called Donny Nardella, who was the deputy speaker of the other place. And you know, you would. I mean, those two individuals. Well, look, I think there was a caravan involved, and there was a caravan involved, as I recall. I'm not sure it was a JCO, but that's down in your electorate, I believe, Mrs. McArthur. But I think actually Telmo was down in your electorate as well, one of your constituents at one stage. Close to his base, indeed. But you know, people saw that. Well, he did get around a bit, yes, he is, but the money followed. That wherever he went, the money followed. And the people saw that, the people saw that, and they said, if this is what the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of the Parliament of Victoria are capable of, you know, what are the rest of them doing? And that had just fed the perception. That fed the perception that we're all crooks. That fed it further. So it's not rocket science to understand. Well, it could be dogs in cars. We might get to that in a minute. But you know, it's not at all surprising that this corruption perception index has gone through the roof when people see the parliamentary leaders, the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, leading members of the ALP, behaving in such an appalling and corrupt manner. It's not at all surprising. Not at all surprising that people would be appalled and of the view that corruption is rife among elected officials. Speaking of the Corruption Perception Index, there is another issue that I think very recently has fed that perception index, and that is this government's handling of the West Gate Tunnel. Now, way back in 2014, at the same time as the ALP was ripping off the taxpayer to fund its campaign on the Red Shirts Rorts affair. Well, you might have been wearing red shorts. I tell you what, if Miss Terpstra was in red shorts, I'm glad I was somewhere else. But I just remember back in 2014 when, at the same time as the government was involved in the red shirts fiasco, the Premier, Mr. Andrews, was telling everybody about this great plan he had for a Western distributor. It was about $500 million, and he said it was shovel ready. He said it was shovel ready. Now this is before 2014. This is before 2014. He said this to the electorate. In the lead up to the election. At the same time as he was saying that to the electorate, he was discussing with Transurban the project that they've got now. So here he was saying one thing to the electorate, at the same time he was behind closed doors doing deals with Transurban. And hang on, very dodge. Oh shit.
Ms. Terpstra, on a point of order.
Mr. Finn discussing all of those wide-ranging construction projects doesn't seem to be relevant to the motion.
On the point of order, Mr. Finn.
On the point of order, if Ms. Terpstra would be kind enough to give me just a couple more minutes, I'll be happy to explain how that fits in to corruption in Victoria, the CPI, and the increased perception of corruption as a result of this government.
Ms. Terpstra, sorry.
If looking at the motion, it's particularly about government agencies and organisations and complaints that have been received, as opposed to construction projects where there's nothing on the public record in terms of complaints about those construction projects.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Finn. The motion is about government agencies and police corruption.
Yep.
And if you could just very quickly draw your point, if it is relevant to it, and then return to the motion, please.
I draw to 1C of the motion, which refers to research by Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand states that Australian governments display widespread complacency about corruption. Now that goes to the very heart of what I'm talking about. To the very heart of what I'm talking about, and that of course is that the Premier was saying one thing in the public, and in the back room he was dealing with his mates from Transurban, and that's been going on ever since. And as chairman of the Economy and Infrastructure Committee in the last Parliament, we were lied to. We were lied to by Transurban. We were lied to by officers of this government with regard to this project. And when you have vast sums of money changing hands, when you have contracts being signed, when you have deals being done, and lies being told to a parliamentary committee, if that's not corruption, I don't know what is. That is a clear case of corruption. And I have no doubt, there is no doubt in my mind at some stage, this project and the role that the government played in this project and Transurban will be investigated by IBAC. I've no doubt about that at all. It will happen. It will happen. At some stage, this project will be investigated by IBAC, and I tell you what, some of your mates over there just might end up in the big house. They just might end up in the big house. So just watch. You can make a note. Make a note. You might chortle. You might be laughing on the other side of the bars by the time we are finished. Of course, the other aspect of the Westgate tunnel and the rather dodgy involvement of the government in all this is the role that the treasurer of this state played. Now, of course, he sat around the cabinet table as the government agreed to this project. They agreed to give Transurban the contract. There was Tim Pallas, the treasurer, sitting at the cabinet table with the premier. There he was. Didn't actually mention that he had Transurban shares. He actually owns shares in Transurban. Now, if you have a treasurer of this state contributing to making decisions on one of the biggest infrastructure projects in this state's history, and he's got shares in the company that they're giving it to, hey, if that's not corruption, I'm not exactly sure what is. So is it any wonder that people have the perception that they do, that we are all crooks? We are all crooks. And that is, I know, far from the truth. Because the majority of elected members of this parliament, indeed of any parliament, are good, hard-working people who enter the parliament for the right reasons, the overwhelming majority. It's a few bad apples who give us all a very, very bad name indeed, and that is again very sad and something that I personally would love to see changed. I've had hopes over the years as governments have come and governments have gone that a real effort would be made to change that public perception. Unfortunately, I'm still waiting, but I haven't given up yet. I'm still very hopeful. I commend Mr. Quilty for bringing this motion to the House. I think it's an important motion. I think this is a matter that needs to be discussed publicly. Because if you get this sort of thing and you tuck it in the corner and you turn off the lights, it'll grow. Corruption grows in the darkness. Where people can't see, that's where you'll find corruption. And we really need to ensure that the sort of thing that I've discussed here today is exposed. I think if this motion by Mr. Quilty goes some way to doing that, well, that will be a very good thing. Mr. Quilty talks about the Victoria Police's potential for corruption, and I think it's safe to say that police command in Victoria over the last 20 years has left a fair bit to be desired. There was a time when we were all exceedingly proud of Mick Miller indeed, Kel Glare, absolutely, and Neil Comrie, some of the great chief commissioners who we could actually say were on top of their jobs, were leading from the front. They were good coppers. They were good coppers, and they were great chief commissioners. Great chief commissioners. And then along came the politicisation of the police force, and we've seen some very, very, very strange things happen from that point on, and that in itself is a corruption of the force. We go back. Don't start me on Christine Nixon or indeed Simon Overland because we'll be here all night. I can we'll be later than 3 o'clock. I can assure you. He's gone. Hey, Berry, take that man. Take that man out and give him a hanky. He's gone. So I urge the House to support. I urge the House to support this motion of Mr. Quilty. I will leave it there, but I really believe that we must expose the light. And I can understand why Minister Symes is very pleased. I would suggest relieved that I'm coming to an end. Because she is very happy. She is very happy for her government's record to go unnoticed, to not have the light shine upon it. She's very, very happy for that to occur. She wants people to forget the corruption that her government has been involved in over the past 5 years. So I can understand why she's relieved that I am going to come to a conclusion in my contribution just at the minute. But I can assure Minister Symes, as I can assure this House, as I can assure you, Madam Deputy President, that the people of Victoria, the ultimate judges, they will not forget. They will not forget. And come the opportunity, and come the first opportunity, they will slap down this corrupt, filthy government.